Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessin. This is Colorado State of Mind. Tonight we're set to talk about how things are shaping up under that Golden Dome in Denver now that the 2013 session of the Colorado General Assembly is 2 weeks underway. Our panel of legislative reporters have taken a break from the milieu there at the Capitol to come here and describe some of the bills being introduced and what other forces are at work up there. From left to right, we have Tim Hoover of the Denver Post and Charles Ashby of the Grand Junction Sentinel. And joining them, Megan Verlee of Colorado Public Radio and Ed Sealover of the Denver Business Journal. Welcome to you all. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, a Democrat, is beginning his third year in office with a Democrat majority in both the House and the Senate. As we all know, too much of one thing isn't always the ideal. So first, let's talk about the governor's own agenda this term. What's on it, and how does it fit with what all those new leaders in the two chambers want to accomplish?
Well, let's start with the big stuff that he wants to see, civil unions and some of the gun control stuff that he's already talked about, a business bill, a couple of business jobs and economy bill that he wants to do some tax incentives for.
More economic development.
Right. So he's already starting out with them, trying to work with the new leadership in both the House and the Senate on some of these things. How it plays out, there's going to be lots of bills, however, he won't like to see. So.
Yeah, I think most of what the governor wants is in line with what legislators might give him, but there are things the governor doesn't want that he's going to see potentially moving through lawmakers. One is bills that would change the regulations around oil and gas drilling, and particularly the technique known as hydraulic fracturing. There are lawmakers from Aurora, the Senate Majority Leader Morgan Carroll, who really want tighter controls on that process. The governor wants to keep all of that at the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, and so you could see bills coming that are diametrically opposed with what he's trying to do with that industry.
That's right. So the commission, just in the last few weeks, agreed to a set of rules, but the setbacks aren't as big as Morgan Carroll would like.
Exactly. She wants rigs further away from home. She wants more protection for groundwater. And, talking with her, she said, I've got a bill title ready, and if what I'm seeing from the governor and from the COGCC is not what I want, I'm going to come forward with something.
And it was interesting to see in the State of the State address, the governor touched on a lot of topics that got a lot of applause from his own party. When he mentioned, I want uniform drilling regulations, it seemed to be mostly Republican applause coming out of that one. A lot of people are worried about the Oil and Gas Commission taking over the process that some local entities now do. And I think that's where the governor's going to have to decide where to make a stand with his party or with his beliefs.
Another obvious time when the room was somewhat lopsided was when he called for universal background checks for gun sales, because of course right now private sales, there's no background checks, and Republicans are saying, look, the only way this can occur is for there to be gun registration, which is pretty controversial. So there was some pretty stony-faced silence on one side of the room.
Now, to what extent will the governor have help from what the president has just laid out with the gun control agenda?
He'll have a lot of wind at his back. In that sense, the problem is that it's unclear how far Hickenlooper is willing to go himself, and so the universal background checks seems to have been applauded by all around in his own party. But what's not clear is if they're going to support, say, limits on high capacity magazines for guns. What extent? I mean, is a 30-round magazine okay? A 10-round? And it's not clear if they'd go even farther than that. There are lawmakers that want an assault weapons ban, which some people say is really tricky.
Especially the definition of what an assault weapon is.
Exactly. Sometimes what is an assault weapon is largely cosmetic, and with minor tweaks, manufacturers can change what used to be what people think of as an assault-style weapon into something that's not, but it's essentially the same weapon. So it's really unclear, exactly how far we're headed. And even with the universal background check proposal, that's a real question. Are we talking about registration?
Charles, there's Representative Steve King from your neck of the woods who is one of the people not happy to see Mark Ferrandino, for instance, be in charge in the House because he's not for same-sex unions. And Ferrandino has made that a pretty big priority.
Yeah, but I think a lot of them are have given in to the reality that that's going to pass.
Oh, interesting.
They're like, let's just get it done with. We can't do anything to stop it. We won't stop them from debating it, of course. They will debate it, and they will talk about it, and they will try to amend it and lighten it up, or just get themselves on the record saying we don't like this and this shouldn't be happening. But they're pretty much resolved to the fact that there's not much they could do to stop it at this point. So.
And there's nothing much they can do but go on making marijuana legal. Where does that stand, Megan?
Well, they've been trying. There's been an effort to keep it out of the session for as long as possible. The governor appointed this 24-person task force, and they're supposed to hammer out a lot of these policies and present them as sort of a fait accompli to the legislature. Look, we got a lot of buy-in on this. You don't have a lot of time to deal with it. Here are the bills, instead of 30 lawmakers coming up with their own solutions. So
long debates.
There are going to be long debates in any case, certainly. But at least I think the governor wants to have bills that have some backing before they really hit the legislature. So you are already seeing some marijuana bills coming out. I think dealing with marijuana DUIs, which has been an issue that almost passed last session, really only lost because a lawmaker didn't return for the special session. That will come back through the legislature. But I think there's a certain amount of hope that this 24-person task force can really nail down some stuff and come to some agreement. Because I know Speaker Ferrandino is worried about this bogging down the session, and suddenly, all they can do is talk about marijuana when he's got a lot of other stuff on his agenda. I mean, this isn't really an issue that any of them were racing to take on. It's something the voters handed to them.
The Attorney General, Eric Holder, has still not really given any direction about how the fact that it's still illegal in federal rules.
And I think it's interesting because he made a statement similar to what the administration said back several years ago about medical marijuana, that they wouldn't be prosecuting individual recreational users. They don't have the manpower for that. And you got the sense that some proponents of marijuana wanted to take that as, we're free and clear to create this. But the federal government has shown that they see a very different situation between, the guy smoking in his basement and a retail storefront on a major street. And so I think it remains a tremendous question, whatever the legislature does, how the federal government will respond.
Ed, let's talk about a couple of things that are important to business. I was interested in your story about the iPad scandal. It's like technology causing a problem here, sir.
Well, I don't think this is a business's top priority, but it signifies the issue of where the state and business overlap. Last year, I should say, the Healthcare Policy and Financing Department asked for bids for a major Medicaid system reboot, and they asked for bids to be submitted on 7 iPads that would not be returned to the bidder. And in general, this got a lot of people in the business community upset, saying, hey, are you going to start forcing people to pay to play, essentially, in order, to give back, to give expensive equipment to the state in order just to bid on contracts? And so on Wednesday this week, Kevin Lundberg, a senator from Berthoud, introduced a bill that would require the state give back any expensive electronic devices that it is requiring people to submit bids on.
Is that any problem for the state? I mean, can't they just copy the material onto their hard drives or whatever they would do?
Well, the department, when I talked to them last summer, said there are 2 problems with it. One, it costs to send iPads back to people, and anything that drives a fiscal note in the state these days is looked down upon. And secondly, they said, well, there could be liability if we give the wrong iPad back to the wrong business.
Well, then don't do that.
That's what Senator Lundberg is saying, but we'll see how far that bill goes.
What's funny about that is that explanation about sending them back, like somehow they can require the business to spend hundreds of dollars sending the iPad, giving them the iPad, but requiring the business to pay an extra $15 per iPad to ship them back suddenly breaks the bank.
Pretty unusual, yes. Strings attached on that kind of thing. So I also wanted to bring up something that Tim wrote about this week, which is this the cover of the new Colorado Statesman. So as we can see, it's a caricature that shows several of these new leaders as football teams, opposing football teams. Tell me more about that.
Well, the lawmakers are not happy about it. Talked to Waller about it the day it came out, and he called it highly, highly offensive. It was odd. When
I
we all
think
saw it was just odd.
I don't know how he was really that bent out of shape about it. It's just that it was somewhat an unflattering portrayal of him, particularly. It was less unflattering of say, Senate Minority Leader Bill Cadman, and of course the Democrats are, they're the team that's winning on this cover. But a lot of people just got, a lot of people were just chatting about it at the Capitol. It was one of those real talker things, and people kept holding it up, laughing, pointing at Waller.
I guess it's kind of fun to see yourself in caricature. Did the statesman?
Not always.
I'm sorry.
Not this
always.
one, maybe.
Did the statesman commission this specially? Did someone say, make this guy look happy, make this guy look sad?
Well, I'm sure they talked about it. The artist that they use is actually a guy who's drawn for other interests, including a conservative outfit at one point. But I think they were talking about, football's topical, and let's have but they did it, and he uses photographs, but the likenesses are so dead on that it's mildly creepy, that they're just so
I can leap off the page at you. What about, we've talked about how the governor may have to worry about, the one side of his party. How are the players themselves working with this new majority?
Well, I think there's a certain roughness just because there's so many new lawmakers. Better than a third, I think, close to 40% of the legislature is new in their seats.
That's right, because of term limits.
And so you see not even the big stuff, but just at the small level, people reading from scripts because they don't know the procedures yet. And I talked with a lawmaker whose bill died yesterday who really blamed it on there being so many freshmen on the committee and them not... I think lawmakers are always looking for something to blame when their bills don't go forward. But he felt that had people had a little more experience with the issue, he might have gotten more support. They weren't aware, for instance, that when the State Patrol comes in and testifies on a bill, they can't take a position, and so they're usually they're neutral, and so these lawmakers took it as a lack of support instead of just a policy by the State Patrol.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I heard through sort of grapevine with some of the staff and lobbyists that there were a few lawmakers who were a little confused about the scope of their authority when they first came in and wanted to, maybe take on some issues that are really sort of the federal government's role.
Don't they have an orientation of sorts with
this
their
happened
parties?
during orientation,
Oh,
and so
okay.
I think these notions were quickly debunked by people saying, okay, well, you don't actually have the power to do that.
They're trying to abolish the IRS or something?
I don't remember if that was specifically one of the proposals, but it was things that clearly Congress only has and way beyond the scope of the legislature. But sometimes you get lawmakers who, get elected who are
They have a lot of energy and
not
a lot of knowledge yet.
They're as civically literate as some of the rest of us.
And sometimes it's they're carrying a bill that they promise some constituents, even though they don't expect it to get through anti-abortion bans, for example, even though they don't really expect, or maybe they don't really expect it to pass, but they can go back and say, well, I tried.
Is there something like that?
Yes, there is. There's two of them, I think. There's one that, three now?
Three bills
Okay.
limiting abortion.
There's one, one just bans abortions entirely, and one bans abortions based on gender. And what's the third one?
The third one would ban any government money from going to I think groups that advocate for abortion, I'm not 100% clear on this, but I believe also doctors that refer patients for abortion, which would be probably quite a wide impact in the medical community.
Right.
Okay, I've got to ask, what do you mean based on gender?
Like, you can't say abort girls, or because they're, you can't. And this may not be
getting Chinese here.
Well,
Yes,
and I don't think
exactly.
it may not be that people actually think this practice is taking place. It may be, I dare you to vote against
Preventative.
this.
Wow.
It's actually based on a undercover video an anti-abortion group made of a couple walking into Planned Parenthood last year and saying, I don't want a girl, can you get rid of this because it's a girl? And Planned Parenthood saying, yes, of course we can.
Oh, wow. So that was one of those sting things. That was a
Yes.
conservative camera crew that went in to get that done.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Interesting. Wow. So what else is interesting as you are thinking of what's ahead of you here?
Well, we haven't talked about the death penalty, which is surely likely to come up at some point. I know that there are some Democrats who are sounding folks out about it, and I think we're we're seriously looking at a year when the Colorado legislature may ban the death penalty in Colorado.
Really?
Right.
Which is interesting, given that you have 2 cases right now where I think the death penalty is in serious consideration. Maybe
Sure.
one, I guess Austin Sigg was too young.
Right. But surely the James Holmes one will be one where that's, very seriously considered. And, at the same time, you could have a legislature that could be voting to ban the death penalty. And in a year when the governor has to possibly consider clemency for a couple of folks on death row whose appeals clock is sort of running out, and Hickenlooper might actually have to kind of sign off on the executions of a couple of people on death row.
We've talked with him about that in the past, and I've never seen him get so personal in an answer to something. He's obviously very much wrestling with the fact that he does, as governor, have power over life and death, and so I think that will be, if he's wrestling with clemency at the same moment that he's wrestling with whether to sign a death penalty ban, that's going to be, I think, a very interesting moment for our governor.
Much rougher year for Hickenlooper than the past 2 years of watching 2 chambers, cancel each other out and do a lot of ribbon cuttings. And
one of the interesting things you asked about how Hickenlooper is going to deal with this, we don't know, is going to be over some labor issues. Oh. There are a couple of bills that are coming through. One particularly that I've heard described by some lobbyists as, if this comes, it's going to be World War III in the legislature.
Hey, that's not hyperbolic.
No, not at all.
It's a labor piece.
That may not be hyperbolic when you're talking about labor bills,
though,
in this state.
It could easily be World War III. It offers collective bargaining for firefighters. Now, the bill was introduced and passed in 2009 and got to then Governor Ritter's desk, a Democrat who vetoed it, but not because he was anti-labor. That was more of a power struggle that was going on. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. I mean, that bill is coming up next week. At the same time, we got civil unions coming up. I'm sorry, I should say next week. At the same time, we've got the asset bill coming up. We've got another big thing coming up next week. So, and then I guess there's another bill that's somewhat controversial, is the use of credit scores for hiring people. Democrats don't like that idea and they want to get rid of it. So there's going to be a few of those things, but we don't know where the governor really stands on some of that stuff. He hasn't faced these kinds of issues before.
Ed, talk more about that one, about credit scores and hiring.
This is a bill that was introduced last year by now Senate Majority Leader Morgan Carroll, passed the Senate, died in a Republican House committee, that would ban, it's not an uncommon practice for businesses to look into the credit scores of potential employees now, figuring that if they have some kind of very poor credit financial issues, it could affect their performance at work, or there could be a problem, especially for a company that handles a lot of money. Carroll says it's discriminatory. She wants to ban the practice. And again, Hickenlooper didn't have to deal with this last year. It's coming back this year in exactly the same form as it was last year. And there's a decent shot it's going to land on his desk, along with a lot of other things that he wasn't prepared for. It's interesting. There's a lot that he's pushing for, and there's a lot that's coming up too. For example, healthcare. He has come out and said we'd like to expand Medicaid eligibility, and that's actually something that they don't have to pass a bill to do. He's got to get some legislative buy-in in future years. They're going to have to allocate the money for it, but he feels like he can get consensus around this. But yet, Senator Irene Aguilar, a legislator in his own party, is going to bring forward a constitutional amendment this year that would essentially create a single payer system. Whereby the government sets what everyone's health insurance policies can be. It taxes employers and employees to fund it in all likelihood. She's still looking at the mechanisms for this. And insurance companies are only there to manage them, not to sell policies or profit off of them anymore. So, there's going to be a fine line between what some people, the far-reaching effects of legislation some people want, and probably the more moderate effects that Hickenlooper is looking for.
And if that's an amendment, obviously it takes a 2/3 vote, and so it's pretty unlikely.
No go to the people?
Well, to refer it to the legislature.
Okay. And it wouldn't even be this year. It would be next year. It would have to be next year as well.
Going back to what we were talking about with the Republican abortion bills, it's not just the minority party that brings bills that may not have a chance, but play into their wheelhouse.
Yeah. On the healthcare expansion, what's interesting to me is that the legislature has to They can do it as a policy from an executive standpoint, but the legislature still has to approve the spending authority for it. So that will be where the debate comes, and there will be a huge, argument about that.
Let's go back to fracking. You said several people, including Morgan Carroll, are hoping to attack this. Is there?
Well, I know that last year there were other Aurora lawmakers who brought bills. I want to say Sue Ryden and a few others who, there are folks on the eastern edge of the metro area who are hearing a lot of concern from their constituents and are under pressure to do something.
And Longmont, of course, is one of the cities where, they've tried to take it into their own hands. Certainly there must be something like that on the western slope, too?
Oh, yeah. We had last year what happened was we had competing bills. We had the Republicans running bills to give the Oil and Gas Commission more down-well authority and taking it away from local governments. And those bills died in the Democratic Senate. And then we had bills in the Republican-held House last year to give local governments more authority. This is all before Longmont did what it did. And then and those died, of course. So that protected Hickenlooper didn't have to deal with that issue. Then he created a task force to look at it, and they came up with nothing because they couldn't agree on it. So you're going to see that same thing now, and probably something get through because you got Democrats in charge of both sides of it. Then Longmont passed an ordinance, and then they had a voter-approved measure that got passed, and they got sued by the COGCC, and they're still battling that now, too, which is part of the reason why the Oil and Gas Commission went through the regulations. But there's always going to be that battle from some people who just don't like it. It's just doesn't go far enough. And just because Morgan Carroll says she wants it doesn't mean she's going to get it.
Oh, I totally agree with you there.
She may think she's majority leader, but it's only in one chamber.
And I think that will actually be the interesting thing in this session is my sense is that House leadership is more in line with the governor and some of his desires than Senate leadership is. And so you may see the House kind of quietly playing that check on the Senate if bills start coming out of there that would have the governor reaching for a veto pen.
A really good example of the sort of way they're split is the Senate leadership kind of somewhat unexpectedly just presented this package that they want to do that it would basically allow for about $120 million in tax breaks for the working poor. That's a lot of money.
Yes.
The state is just now starting to recover from the recession, the state budget is, but we're still well below appropriation levels for many programs like K-12 and higher ed than before the recession. And higher ed has just sustained these year-over-year huge tuition increases. So a lot of people are saying, hey, if there's more money, if we're coming back, let's try to restore some funding for higher ed so we can stave off tuition increases and help try to keep it affordable for kids. Or let's go refund K-12 so they can, hire back teachers that they've had to lay off or fill positions that haven't been filled, whatever. And so I think House Democrats were taken aback by this sudden package of huge tax breaks that sort of came out, and it didn't have the blessing of the governor's office either. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yes,
Juxtapose that with House Bill 1001, the first bill introduced in the House, which just passed out of its first committee on Thursday afternoon. That bill was one introduced by the governor with both House Republicans and House Democrats present to go after the governor's personal passion, which is economic development, in order to recruit what he called advanced industries, places like bioscience and aerospace and technology. And interestingly, oil and gas drilling can be included in that if there are innovative techniques as well. That's kind of where he's put his money, as it seems like, is working with more some of the House Democrats to kind of push this agenda versus what we see coming out of the Senate.
I was just going to add that Speaker Ferrandino on Thursday, when asked about the Senate Bill 1 and those tax cuts, said he totally agreed with the philosophy behind it, but we're going to have to see how it fits in the budget. And of course, the Speaker is a budget guy. He was on the Joint Budget Committee for years and years, and so I think that it sort of has an innate conservatism when you start seeing bills with gigantic fiscal notes coming from the other chamber.
Last thing we have time for, I just want to touch on this initiative that the governor developed last year called TBD, To Be Determined, which was a series of meetings around the state. Tell us where that is going, Tim.
I think it's still TBD. To a lot of people, it was somewhat of an anticlimactic sort of letdown kind of thing. This report came out, and a lot of it, the language was like, should still consider, continue to study, and I think a lot of people were sort of, disappointed that it didn't call in more stronger terms for, do one thing or another.
Specific legislation or something.
Sure, or let's say, let's consider raising taxes, or let's do this to Tabor, or let's do this to Gallagher, let's do this to Amendment 23. And there just were not, one of the things that was sort of recommended is something that there's a group of private individuals who are kind of pushing this hard and running with it, and I think it's got the blessing of some lawmakers, but it's likely to happen in a private way, which is to form this constitutional review commission, so that every, say, 10 years, this commission of ordinary citizens, kind of like a grand jury sort of thing, review the Constitution, see what's working, what's not working, and recommend, put something before voters that could have a multi-part fix, something that's banned now under our single subject rule.
Plenty of big things to be working on here. That is Colorado State of Mind for this week. You can see the program again at video.rmpbs.org. We thank Tim Hoover and Charles Ashby, and also Megan Verlee and Ed Sealover. We will check back with you all before the session ends, I'm sure, or when it does. Next week, a new report from the newly minted iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS. This one, an extensive picture of how social and economic equality has slowed for some Colorado residents to a point that it matches the lack of progress in the 1960s. Losing Ground is the name of the series, and we'll be looking at various aspects of it over the next few weeks on Colorado State of Mind, beginning next week at this time. Thank you for joining us this weekend. I'm Cynthia Hessin. Good night.
And so there's a lot of, I'm going to save the world, type bills that are out there. And I'm gathering from some of the veterans in both caucuses that they're like, you know what? Calm down.
Kind of the adults and the kids.
This is maybe not the message we're trying to put out. Because we have to play chess here, not checkers.
Some they can't.
We'd like to be back in charge someday, or conversely, we'd really like to hold on